The morning sun spilled over Crestwood Heights like a lazy promise, washing the suburban streets in a golden glow that made everything look too neat, too staged. Identical houses lined up like soldiers' lawns, clipped to perfection. Silver SUVs gleaming in every driveway were a world built to keep out anything rough around the edges. Jordan Tate didn't fit here. At 16, she stepped out of her mom's rattling sedan, her gray hoodie swallowing her slim frame, a shadow against the postcard sheen. She wasn't just new. She was a crack in their flawless glass bubble, and she knew it before her sneakers even hit the pavement. Her mother didn't linger. No have a good day, no wave, just the grind of the engine as she pulled away, off to crash after another night shift at the hospital. Jordan watched the taillights fade, her jaw tight. Silence was their language now, ever since the bills piled up and the talking stopped. Back home in the crumbling streets where she'd grown up, she'd learned to carry herself head up, eyes sharp because no one else would. She'd seen Marcus take it the hard way too, years ago. Three older kids cornering him outside the corner store, fists flying while she hid behind a dumpster, too small to help. He'd crawled home bloody, looked her in the eye and said, "Don't let him walk over you, Geordie, ever." She was 8 then. She hadn't forgotten. Crestwood Heights High loomed ahead, all red brick and clean lines, banners flapping above the entrance. Excellence through community. The words mocked her as she adjusted her frayed backpack strap, her fingers brushing the calluses on her knuckle scars from the basement gym where Marcus had taught her to punch, to dodge, to breathe through the rage. Students poured through the glass doors, a tide of laughter and glowing phones moving like they'd owned this place since birth. Their sneakers were spotless, their backpacks slung carelessly over one shoulder, their voices loud with lake house plans and weekend boasts. They didn't see her yet, not really, but she felt the first ripples, quick glances, hushed murmurs, the kind that sized her up and found her wanting. She wasn't invisible, and that was the problem. Her dark skin, her tight curls yanked into a messy bun, the way she moved, quiet but deliberate, marked her as an intruder. They didn't know her hands could break a punching bag, that her silence wasn't weakness but a fuse waiting for a spark. They saw a target, an easy mark to test. Big mistake. Shed promised Marcus she'd keep her cool, but Shed also promised herself something else. No one would crush her here. Not these kids, not this school, not this perfect little lie of a town. Jordan lifted her chin, just enough to meet the world head-on, and walked through the doors. The air hit her lemon-scented, sterile, fake as hell. The hallways stretched wide, lockers glossy navy, floors reflecting the lights like a mirror. It was too clean, too loud in the wrong places, too quiet where it shouldn't be. She didn't belong not yet, but as she cut through the crowd, her steps firm, her fists buried in her pockets, she staked her claim. They'd learn who she was, one way or another. Jordan eased into the back row of homeroom, the plastic chair groaning as she settled in. The room thrummed with noise girls giggling over phone screens, guys lobbing wads of paper like it was a game they'd mastered years ago. She kept her head low, unzipping her backpack just enough to fish out a notebook, its edges frayed from too many late nights. The teacher, Ms. Daniels, stood at the front, her smile tight and rehearsed, calling roll with a voice that grated like a morning alarm. "Jordan Tate?" she said, her eyes flicking up, lingering a beat too long. Jordan raised a hand, silent, her gaze fixed on the desk. "Welcome to Crestwood," Ms. Daniels chirped, but the sweetness felt hollow, like a sales pitch no one bought. Jordan didn't answer. She wasn't here for welcomes. She was here to make it through. The first week blurred past bells ringing, teachers droning, hallways packed with kids who moved like they owned the air. Crestwood was a machine of privilege. Lockers stuffed with crisp textbooks, vending machines where spitting out Red Bulls, voices bragging about jet skis and summer cabins. Jordan drifted through it, a ghost in their glossy world, her steps quiet but her senses sharp. She caught the first hints, early quick smirks, muttered new girl trailing her like exhaust. "What's she doing here?" A blonde in a cheer skirt whispered to her friend. Loud enough to carry, Jordan kept walking, her jaw tight. Shed heard sharper cuts back home, slurs spit from busted car windows. Threats hissed on dark corners. This was nothing. Not yet. Then they found her. Ryan Kessler leaned against a locker on day 3, his blonde hair swept back, blue eyes glinting like he'd never been told no. His varsity jacket screamed his name in gold thread, a crown he wore before earning it. Ethan loomed beside him, a wall of muscle with a lazy grin that hid a mean streak. Nate skittered nearby, all angles and sharp teeth, his laugh a needle prick waiting to draw blood. They were Crestwood's self-made royalty, strutting like the halls were their throne room, and Jordan was the peasant who'd wandered too close. It started light, a test. She was heading to English when Ethan's shoulder rammed hers, books crashing to the tile with a smack. "My bad," he said, his grin wide and fake, his bulk blocking her path. Ryan chuckled low, a king amused by his gesture, while Nate's cackle sliced through. "Watch it, ghetto girl, don't trip over your own feet." A few kids slowed, heads turning, some snickered. Others looked away fast, like they didn't want the smoke. Ms. Daniels passed by, her clipboard clutched tight, but her eyes slid past the mess, her heels clicking away. Jordan bent down, gathering her books, her fingers steady, but her pulse kicking. She met Nate's gaze for a split second. He flinched, just a twitch, then stood and walked off, giving them nothing. Not yet. By week 2, they'd made it a sport. In chemistry, Ethan slipped, knocking her pencil to the floor with a clatter. "Clumsy me," he said, loud enough for the room to hear, drawing muffled laughs from the back. Ryan lounged across the lab, arms crossed, watching like a director staging his next scene. A girl with braids near Jordan rolled her eyes but stayed quiet, her pen tapping fast. The teacher, Sharon, Opana Bayem. Mr. Powell glanced up from his grading, muttered, "Settled down," then went back to his paper, useless as a scarecrow in a storm. Jordan retrieved the pencil, her breath slow, Marcus's voice echoing in her skull. "Don't swing first, Jordy. Wait for the real hit." She wanted to, her fists ached for it, but she held the line, her silence a coiled spring. The gym was where it turned ugly. Drills were running, the court alive with sweat and squeaking sneakers. Jordan stayed on the edge, her footwork tight, years of shadowboxing guiding every step. Ethan barreled in during a rebound, snatching the ball and hurling it at her head hard. It smacked her temple, a hot sting flaring up, and she stumbled, catching herself on the baseline. "Guess you're used to taking hits where you're from, huh?" he barked, his laugh bouncing off the walls. Nate jogged by, piling on. "Yeah, she's probably dodging bullets instead of running drills." A few kids froze. A wiry boy near the hoop winced. A girl on the bleachers smirked like it was a show. Coach Harris blew his whistle, sharp and late, yelling, "Cut it out, Ethan!" But his glare landed on Jordan, like Shed invited it. She wiped sweat from her brow, her heart thudding, not fear but heat, a furnace roaring to life. Her fists balled tight, knuckles popping, every muscle screaming to let loose, a jab to Ethan's gut, a hook to Nate's jaw, a dance Shed perfected under flickering gym lights. She saw it clear as day, their smug faces crumpling, their laughter choking off. Ryan watched from the sidelines, hands in his pockets, his smirk a blade daring her to swing. She locked eyes with him, just at a heartbeat, and saw the game he wanted her to break, to prove she didn't belong. She turned back to the drill, her grip on the ball like iron, her silence louder than their noise. Inside, it stacked up every shove, every word, every laugh piling like bricks on her shoulders. She remembered Marcus after that beating, blood on his lip, telling her they'll push till you push back. Make it hurt when you do. Her hands twitched, her breath sharp and even, a fighter pacing the ring. She wasn't swinging today, not yet, but the fire was there, licking at her edges, waiting for the spark. They thought they could toy with her, wear her down. They didn't know they were building their own fall, brick by stupid brick. And when it dropped, she'd make damn sure they felt it. The art room carried a stale whiff of glue and paint thinner, a faint bite in the air as Jordan sat near the back, her pencil carving slow, jagged lines into a blank sheet. She wasn't sketching anything real, just slashes, loops, a way to keep her hands steady while her mind churned. The class buzzed with a lazy hum kids sprawled over tables, some doodling half-hearted shapes, others whispering about Friday night hookups. Mrs. Henley had ducked out, muttering about grabbing more paper from the supply closet, leaving the room in that fragile hush where trouble brews unseen. Jordan felt it crawl up her spine, a prickling heat, a warning she had learned to trust back when dodging fists was a daily lesson. Ryan Kessler made his move first. He'd been slouched near the front, twirling a pair of school scissors like a bored punk with a switchblade, his blue eyes glinting with that smug, untouchable shine. Ethan lumbered up beside him, cracking his knuckles with a pop that turned a few heads, while Nate edged in, his sharp giggle cutting the air like a rusty nail. They didn't rush, they swaggered, weaving through desks with the ease of wolves circling a lone deer, stopping right behind her. She didn't turn, but her pencil froze mid-stroke, her breath hitching just enough to sharpen her focus. "Hey, Jordan," Ryan drawled, his voice loud and slick, ringing out for everyone to hear. "That hair's a damn mess. Let me fix it for you." Before she could shift, his hand clamped her shoulder, hard, fingers digging in like a vise. The cold bite of the scissors grazed her neck, and then snip a savage, ripping cut tore through her hair. It wasn't a trim. It was a massacre, half her thick coiled locks sheared off in one brutal slash, leaving a raw, uneven gash across the back of her head. The severed curls hit the floor with a dull slap, splaying out like a spilled secret, dark and broken on the white tiles. Ethan's laugh boomed, a gut-deep howl that shook the room. "Oh man, you went for it," he roared, slapping his thigh like it was a comedy goldmine. Nate jumped in, his voice a high-pitched screech. "Check her out, looks like she's ready to sling dope on the corner now." A few kids gasped sharp, quick intakes of breath. A girl with glasses in the front row flinched, her pencil clattering to the desk, while a lanky boy near the window smirked, leaning forward like he'd paid for the show. Another kid, a quiet one with a faded hoodie, stared at the floor, his fists balling tight under the table. The room split shock, amusement, silence, and no one moved. Ryan stepped back, dangling the hacked-off hair like a scalp had claimed, twirling it with a grin that bared too many teeth. "You're welcome, princess," he said, his tone thick with venom. "Thought I'd lighten you up a little." He didn't stop there. He tossed the curls down and ground them under his sneaker, the sole twisting, slow and deliberate, crushing them into the tile like trash underfoot. Jordan's hand lifted, brushing the ragged edge where her hair used to be jagged void, a wound deeper than skin. It wasn't just hair. It was her mom's hands braiding it late at night, humming soft tunes when money was tight. It was Marcus tugging it playfully after her first sparring win, saying, "You're a champ, Jordy." It was her shield, her pride, and they'd ripped it away like it meant nothing. She stood, the chair screeching against the floor, a sound that sliced the room's stunned hush like a blade. Her eyes locked on Raya, not cold anymore, but blazing, a firestorm held back too long. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice low, steady, a growl rolling up from her chest. Ryan didn't flinch. He stepped closer, shoving the last strands into her face, letting them fall like a slap. "What's wrong, tough girl? Gonna cry now?" he taunted, his breath hot and smug. "Or you gonna hit me? Go on, I dare you." He pushed her shoulder again, not a nudge but a shove, his palm slamming her back a step, a challenge carved into every inch of his smirk. The room held its breath. The girl with glasses whispered, "Oh my God," her voice trembling, barely audible. The lanky boy leaned in, his smirk widening, while the quiet one in the hoodie looked up, eyes flickering with something anger, maybe hope. Mrs. Henley burst back in, arms loaded with paper, her voice pitching high. "What in the hell is going on here?" She froze mid-step, the sheet slipping from her grip, fluttering down as her gaze darted from Jordan to Ryan, then to the hair smeared across the floor. Her face paled, her hands shaking, but she didn't move forward, just stood there, stammering. "Ryan, you Jordan, what? Just a prank, Mrs. H," Ryan cut in, tossing the scissors onto a table with a clank, his tone casual, like he'd spilled paint, not pride. "She's blowing it out of proportion." "Right, Jordan?" He pushed her again, lighter this time, but enough to say, "I'm still in charge." The air thickened, a pressure cooker ready to blow, every eye pinned on her, waiting for tears, for her to run, to prove she was the weak link they'd pegged her for. They didn't know her. They didn't see the nights Shed spent ducking Marcus's jabs, the mornings Shed pounded bags till her hands bled, the promise Shed made after watching him crawl home beaten. Never let them win. Her fist clenched, knuckles popping, a dull throb spreading through her palms. Marcus' voice rang in her head, rough and clear. When you swing, make it hurt. She looked at the hair, her hair mangled under Ryan's sneaker, then up at his face, that dare still gleaming in his eyes. The gas faded, the stares blurred. Mrs. Henley's shaky protest dissolved into static. All she saw was him, standing there like he'd stripped her bare and won, like he could take anything and laugh it off. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She stood taller, her shadow stretching long and dark, a storm cloud swallowing the light. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her words quiet but heavy, each one a brick dropping into place. Ryan's smirk twitched, a flicker of unease breaking through, gone as fast as it came. But she saw it. He opened his mouth ready with another jab, another shove, but the fuse was lit. She'd held it in too long, the shoves, the taunts, the ball to her head, and now this, the final cut. Her hands flexed, her breath steadied, the fighter waking up. They'd pushed her to the edge and she was done playing their game. The explosion was here, and they'd feel every damn spark. Ryan's smirk dangled like a lit match, his hand still brushing her shoulder, his dare ringing in her ears. Hit me. I dare you. The words snapped something inside Jordan, a thread stretched too tight for too long. The scissors, the laughter, her hair crushed under his sneaker. It wasn't just an insult. It was a theft, a piece of her ripped away like they owned her. She'd seen Marcus crawl home bloody once, promising herself she'd never let that be her. Now Ryan stood there grinning like he'd won, like she'd bend and break. He'd misread her silence. It wasn't fear, it was a countdown. She moved fast, fluid, a boxer's instinct kicking in. Her right shoulder rolled back, and she threw a hook, her fist crashing into Ryan's jaw with a wet crack bone buckling under knuckles honed on heavy bags. His head whipped sideways, his body slamming into the table behind him, paint jars shattering in a spray of red and yellow, streaking the floor like blood. He crumpled, clutching his face, blood trickling through his fingers from a busted lip and a nose bent wrong. His eyes wide with shock, the smirk erased in a heartbeat. Ethan charged, a bellowing bull, his roar filling the room. You're done, bitch! His fist swung wild, aiming for her skull. Jordan dropped low, feet sliding left, right, a dance Marcus had drilled into her under flickering gym lights. She surged up, driving a straight punch into his gut, her knuckles sinking deep. He gasped, air rushing out in a choked wheeze, and doubled over. She followed with a jab to his cheek, sharp, precise, sending him crashing to his knees, the floor trembling under his weight, his breath ragged and broken. Nate darted in, sneaky as a rat, aiming to grab her from behind. She heard the rustle of his jacket, felt the shift in the air. Spinning hard, she snagged his wrist mid-lunge, twisted it with a snap, and yanked him forward. His own speed betrayed him. He stumbled right into her left hook, a clean shot that smashed his nose flat. Blood sprayed, a hot splash across the tiles, and he collapsed, shrieking, curling up with hands cupped over his face, tears mixing with the red. Stop, please, he sobbed, his voice cracking like a kid caught stealing. The room exploded, sharp gasps, a scream piercing the air, chairs scraping as kids shoved back from their desks. The girl with glasses bolted upright, whispering, "She's crazy," her voice trembling with fear, while the lanky boy near the window clapped once, grinning like he'd bet on the right horse. The quiet kid in the hoodie stared, fists unclenching, a flicker of awe breaking through his blank mask. Mrs. Henley staggered forward, paper still clutched to her chest, her face white as chalk. "Jordan, stop this instant," she cried, but her voice shook, her eyes darting to the hair on the floor. Guilt flashing there like she'd known it was coming and done nothing. Jordan stood tall, her breath steady, fists still bowled at her sides, paint and blood speckling her sneakers. She'd dropped them all, Ryan groaning on the table, Ethan wheezing on his knees, Nate whimpering in a ball in less than 10 seconds. 3 kings dethroned by the girl they thought they could shatter. But she wasn't finished. She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping the room, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Anyone else?" she asked, her voice cold, hard, a steel edge that silenced every whisper. "Anyone think they can touch me and walk away?" The air froze, thick with fear and something heavier, respect maybe, or dread. No one dared blink. The girl with glasses sank back into her seat. The lanky boy's grin faded, and the quiet kid nodded once, faint but real. Then the twist hit. She didn't swing again. She didn't bolt. She stepped forward, bent down, and scooped her mangled hair from the tiles, still warm, still hers despite the ruin. The room watched, breathless, as she walked to Mrs. Henley's desk. The teacher flinched, clutching her papers tighter, her mouth gaping like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Jordan dropped the hair onto the desk, a dark, twisted heap that landed with a soft, damp thud. "You saw it," she said, her tone flat but unyielding, each word a hammer strike. "They cut me. They pushed me. They dared me. You didn't stop them. Now you deal with it." She held Mrs. Henley's gaze, unblinking, letting the weight of her failure settle, then turned and walked out, her steps calm, deliberate, a victor leaving a battlefield Shed claimed. The hallway swallowed her, the echo of her sneakers on the linoleum cutting through the uproar spilling from the room. Mrs. Henley's voice broke through, shrill and frantic. "Someone get Principal Carter. Right now!" Kids shouted over each other. She broke his face. They deserved it. What just happened? Their words tumbling into a frantic mess. Jordan didn't look back. She didn't need to. She felt the ground shift, the crack Shed split wide open in their little kingdom of arrogance. They'd wanted her to snap, and Shed given them a reckoning they'd carry like scars. Her heart pounded, not with panic but with fire, the same rush she'd felt in the ring. Gloves up. Marcus barking. "Finish it clean, Jordy." She'd finished it all right, and it felt good damn good. Her knuckles throbbed, a sweet ache of triumph. But it wasn't just about the fight. They'd taken her hair, her pride, her peace, laughing like it was theirs to steal. She'd taken it back, not with tears or pleas, but with fists that spoke louder than words. Marcus' voice echoed, rough and proud. "Make 'em remember." She flexed her hands, the power still buzzing through her. They'd remember this every punch, every fall, every second she stood over them. She stopped at the hall's end, leaning against a locker, her breath slowing as the adrenaline drained. Her fingers brushed the jagged patch on her scalp, and for a moment the sting hit her mom's braids. Marcus's grin all torn away, but they hadn't taken her. She closed her eyes, seeing Marcus' bloody face that night years ago, his promise. Don't let him win. She hadn't. She'd fought for him, for herself, for every kid they'd ever crushed. Footsteps thundered closer, security, probably ready to haul her off. Let them try. She'd swung because she had to, because no one else would. And whatever came next, she'd face it standing. The art room door banged open, voices spilling out Mrs. Henley's panic. Kids' stunned chatter. Jordan straightened, her jaw set, her eyes hard as flint. This wasn't the end, it was the start. She'd thrown the first punch, and now, the school, Ryan, everyone who'd watched and waited, they'd have to answer. She was ready. Jordan leaned against the locker, her knuckles still pulsing as the hallway erupted behind her. Mrs. Henley's shrill cries bled through the art room door. Get help, mixing with the frantic buzz of kids shouting over each other. She didn't flinch. She'd cracked their world open. Ryan bleeding, Ethan gasping, Nate sobbing, and the pieces were falling fast. Her hair might be gay, but she'd taken something bigger. Their throne, their smug little kingdom. Marcus's voice rang in her ears, rough from that night he'd limped home beaten. Make 'em pay, Jordy, when they push too far. She had, and she wasn't sorry. Heavy boots thudded down the hall, two security guards, their radios crackling, faces set hard. Jordan Tate, the bigger one snapped, his buzz cut glinting under the lights. Hands up now! She raised them slow, palms open, her eyes steady as stone. Office, the second guard grunted, shorter but tense, his hand hovering near his belt. They flanked her, close but not touching, like they weren't sure what she'd do next. She didn't resist, just walked, their shadows trailing her, the echo of her steps cutting through their ragged breaths. The hall filled with kids pressing against lockers, their whispers sharp and jagged. She smashed his face. They cut her hair first, but she kept her gaze forward, unflinching. The principal's office smelled of stale coffee and polished wood, a sealed box against the storm outside. Principal Carter stood behind his desk, tall and solid, his dark eyes piercing through the dim light. His sleeves were rolled up, hands resting on a thick manila folder, and beside it sat her hair, tangled, dark, a silent witness to the war she'd just fought. He waved the guards off without looking. "Shut the door," he said, his voice low, steady, and it clicked closed, muffling the chaos. He didn't sit, just stared at her, arms crossed, like he was measuring the weight of what she'd done. "Sit," he said, nodding to the chair. She did, her back straight, meeting his gaze. "Henley gave me the rundown," Carter began, his tone even but heavy. "3 boys down, 1 bleeding, 1 winded, 1 crying. Your hands?" Jordan nodded once. "Yes, sir. No hesitation, no apology." He tapped the folder, his jaw tight. "She says they cut your hair first, half your head. Pushed you, dared you to swing. That right?" She gestured to the hair on his desk, her voice calm but edged. "You see it, you tell me." He glanced at it, his lips thinning, then leaned forward, knuckles pressing into the wood. "I've got witnesses who saw you throw punches, Jordan. Parents will come roaring in. You ready for that?" She didn't blink. "I'm ready for what they started. They've been at me for weeks. Nobody stopped them. I did." Before Carter could reply, the door slammed open, banging against the wall. A man stormed in tall, square-shouldered, his suit screaming money, his face flushed red with rage. Ryan's father, Kessler Sr., no question the same sharp jaw, the same entitled glare, a Rolex flashing as he waved a furious hand. "Carter," he bellowed, his voice a cannon shot. "My son's in the nurse's office with a busted nose. And this animal sits here like it's nothing? I want her out, expelled, arrested, today." He jabbed a finger at Jordan, then pulled out his phone, jabbing the screen. "1 call to the superintendent, own call, and you're done, Carter. My firm bankrolls this school. You think you can protect her?" Carter didn't flinch. He stepped around the desk, closing the gap, his presence a wall of steel. "Kessler," he said, voice rising slow, deliberate. "Your son assaulted a student in my building. Cut her hair, half her damn head, taunted her, dared her to fight." She answered, "You want to talk protection? Let's talk why he's been untouchable for years." He slapped the folder down, papers spilling complaints, dates, names. 2 years of this kid's shoved, lockers trashed, girls cornered, all buried because nobody wanted your lawyer sniffing around. Not this time. He leaned in, eyes locked on Kessler's. "Make your call. Tell him about the files, signed, dated, airtight. Tell him how you tried to buy me off. He'll wait. But you're not bearing this." Kessler's face twisted rage, then panic flickering through. "This is a prank gone wrong," he spat. "She attacked 3 boys, white boys, and you're siding with her?" He stepped closer, voice dropping to a snarl. "It'll ruin you both." Carter didn't budge. "Try it," he said, his words a growl. "I've got witnesses, kids who saw it all. Henley, who stood there and let it happen. And this," he pointed to the hair, "that's not a prank. That's a line crossed. You want to fight? Bring your lawyers." "I've got the truth." The air crackled, Kessler's hand trembling on his phone, his bluff crumbling. He backed off, pointing one last time. "You'll regret this," he hissed, then stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the frame. Carter turned to Jordan, his expression softening, just a crack. "He's right about one thing," he said. "Quieter now. This'll get loud, but you're not in it alone." She nodded, her lips a thin line, exhaustion seeping through her steel. He sat, pulling the folder closer. "I've seen this too long," he said, almost to himself. "Kids like Ryan Rich, loud, connected, picking on kids like you, new, quiet, tough. They think they own this place. Always have." He tapped the desk. "You broke that today. They won't forgive it. She met his eyes, steady again. I didn't do it for forgiveness. I did it so they'd learn. He almost smiled, almost. Fair, he said, sliding a suspension form over. 3 days standard for fighting. Sign it. Go home. Rest up. She scribbled her name, stood, the hair still sitting there like a battle flag. What about them? She asked, nodding toward the door. Carter leaned back, arms crossed. Ryan's gone expulsion hearings tomorrow. Ethan and Nate get a month, plus public apologies. And I'm rewriting the rules here, no more blind eyes. This school's done shielding bullies. She nodded, a flicker of relief breaking through not for herself, but for the ones who'd come after her, the ones Marcus couldn't save back then. Outside, the halls churned with whispers, kids staring as she passed, some scared, some awed, all different now. Mrs. Henley lingered near the art room, her face pale, avoiding Jordan's gaze like she'd seen a ghost. The lanky boy from a class smirked from a distance, but the quiet kid in the hoodie caught her eye, giving a small, firm nod solidarity. Maybe. Ryan's reign was dead buried under her fist in Carter's resolve. She'd swung for herself, for Marcus's bloody promise, for every kid they'd crushed. The fight wasn't over, but the first round was hers. Jordan walked out of Crestwood Heights High that afternoon, her suspension papers crumpled in her backpack, her head high despite the jagged patch where her hair used to be. The sky sagged with gray, a damp wind cutting through the parking lot, but she didn't feel the cold. Her knuckles throbbed, her scalp stung, but a fire burned steady in her chest. Quiet triumph she carved out with her own hands. She'd swung, and they'd fallen. Ryan, Ethan, Nate, their whole smug empire toppled. Marcus' voice echoed from that bloody night years ago. Make 'em remember, Jordy. She had, and she'd made sure they'd never forget. The next day was a storm. Parents descended on the school before dawn, black SUVs and sleek sedans clogging the lot, voices sharp with outrage as they stormed the administration building. Ryan's expulsion hearing was at 9 a.m., and Kessler Sr. had rallied his troops, promising legal hell to keep his son in the game. Jordan stayed home, perched on her bed, wrapping her hands in faded athletic tape Marcus had swiped from the gym years back. She didn't need to watch. She'd already struck the match Carter, and the truth would finish the blaze. By noon, it was done. Carter stood firm, the board unbending under a flood of testimony from kids who'd finally spoken up, girls Ryan had cornered, boys Ethan had shoved, names from that thick folder now alive with voices. Ryan was out, no appeals, no deals, expelled with a unanimous vote. Ethan and Nate got a month each, plus a public apology at the next assembly, their names etched into a new anti-bullying code that didn't flinch for wealth or threats. Kessler Sr. raged out of the meeting, his curses bouncing off the walls, but they landed on nothing. The school had turned, and his money couldn't buy it back. Jordan returned after 3 days, stepping through the doors like she'd never left. The halls felt heavier, not softer but charged, like everyone was holding their breath. She wore a plain black shirt, her uneven hair pulled tight, the hacked-off patch stark and unhidden. She didn't cover it, it wasn't her shame to bear. Whispers followed. That's her. She took 'em all out, but she moved steady, eyes forward. At lunch, a skinny kid with glasses stopped her, tray shaking in his hands. I'm Maya, he said, voice small but clear. They locked me in a closet last year. They don't mess with me now. Thanks. She nodded, a flicker of warmth breaking through. Sit if you want, she said. And he did, his shy grin the first crack in her solitude. That afternoon, Carter called an assembly. The auditorium hummed with tension as kids piled in, teachers lining the walls like sentries. He took the stage, his voice ablaze through the noise. We failed you, not just Jordan Tate, but every kid who's been targeted and left to fight alone. No more. He laid out the new rule: zero tolerance. No exceptions. Punishment that didn't bend for names or wallets. Ethan and Nate shuffled up, heads low, their apologies stumbling out. We're sorry, we didn't mean weak, forced, drowned by the crowd's heavy silence. No cheers, just eyes, some hard, some relieved, watching a dynasty die. Jordan stood at the back, arms crossed, her face still. She didn't need their words, she'd claimed her justice in the art room. But this was more. A week later, she saw it in the cafeteria. A wiry boy with braces stood when a jock swiped his tray, his voice shaky but loud. "Back off, or I'm telling." The jock froze, then slunk away. Maya caught her eye from across the room and nodded, a silent pact. They weren't alone anymore. Kids started watching, speaking, a quiet network forming in the shadows Jordan had cracked open. She didn't lead it, she didn't have to. Her fists had lit the spark. That night she hit the gym. The air was thick with sweat and leather, the bulbs buzzing overhead as Marcus leaned on the ring, tossing her gloves with a grin. "Heard you drop 3 clowns," he said, pride rough in his voice. "Should have seen 'em fall," she replied, catching them midair. She wrapped her hands, stepped in, and pounded the bag. Each hit a thunderclap, steady and fierce. "You waited," Marcus said, watching her flow. "Then you finished it." She paused, sweat dripping, and looked at him. "Now they know," she said, her voice low. "Final. They don't get to take from me or anyone." At home, she pulled her books from her bag and found the old Braider Mom's work from years back, tucked in a journal. She held it, not with loss, but with strength, setting it on her shelf visible, reclaimed. Her mom shuffled in later, setting a mug of tea on the dresser, her tired eyes lingering on the braid, soft with something rare pride maybe. "You're tougher than me," she murmured, then left, her footsteps fading down the hall. Jordan smiled, small but real, the warmth sinking deep. She wasn't just the girl who fought back, she was the line they couldn't cross. Her final vow came quiet, etched into her core. "I didn't swing to break them. I swung to reclaim what's mine. Dignity's not theirs to give or take, it's a right, forged in blood and bone, and ill fight for it every damn time. This wasn't just my word, it's a warning. Touch me, touch anyone, and you'll fall. Hard. I'm not here to bend, I'm here to stand, and they'll learn to step aside or get crushed." She flicked off the light, the dark alive with her power, a crown shed built from the ashes of their ruin. Crestwood would never be the same. This story isn't just about a fight, it's about standing up when the world tries to knock you down. Jordan Tate teaches us 3 big lessons. First, dignity is a right, not a privilege. No one gets to take it from you, not with words, not with scissors, not with power, and when they try, you've got every right to fight back. Jordan didn't just swing for herself. She swung for every kid who'd been stepped on, proving that your worth isn't up for grabs. Second, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. She didn't lash out at every taunt or shove. She waited, watched, and struck when it mattered most, turning their arrogance into their downfall. Patience can be a weapon sharper than any fist, and knowing when to use it is power. Third, one voice can change everything. Jordan's punches didn't just break noses, they broke a system. Her stand forced the school to face its failures, sparked others to speak, and built a ripple that turned into a wave. You don't need to be loud or rich to shift the game, you just need to be unbreakable. So what's the takeaway? Don't let anyone define you. Stand tall, pick your moment, and when you fight, whether with fists or words, make it count. You're not just saving yourself, you're lighting the way for others. That's the real victory. If this story hit you hard, smash that like button. It's how we keep these tales alive. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit subscribe now. There's more where this came from. Let's build a crew that doesn't back down. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Jordan's shoes? Let's talk.